why don't you tell everyone, Caitlin, what is Custodia Bank?
It's a safe bank. It's a bank that doesn't lend. A bank that was proposing to hold $1.08 in cash for every dollar of customer deposits in a Fed master account, and the Fed unfortunately denied that request.
Why'd they do that?
Well, the detailed reasoning has yet to come out. I think this community is going to have a field day when it does, but let's see what they say and what they release. But they did call us unsafe and unsound. Great irony. A 108% reserve bank is called unsafe and unsound, while the 6% reserve banks that they were calling safe and sound are now imploding. So quite ironic.
What was really fascinating to us was the moving of the goalpost, right? Apparently the approval process takes about 2 to 3 weeks, or it did before.
5 to 7 days.
And then, exactly, right? And then they just kept elongating it. And then to me, Caitlin, it seemed like quite a big coincidence, the moment in time of which they officially denied the application. It's almost as if they needed a great excuse.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about what's going on. Obviously, some of that is subject to litigation, and there's only so much I can talk about. But you're right. It is not imagined. This was very coordinated. And there were a number of process and procedural changes that corners cut in getting this done. And we're not sitting down and taking it lightly.
Do you believe that, of course, I want to kind of tiptoe around this. Do you believe that this was politically motivated?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yes. Which is what is so interesting. I say with a smile on my face. In the sense that each applicant under administrative law is to be afforded certain due process rights. And we had, this is publicly disclosed. We've talked about it before. 2 days before the application was formally denied, that we were getting leaks from major media outlets telling us that our application was about to be voted down. It was a foregone conclusion. It was preordained. And that was 2 days before the vote took place. And we hadn't even made a decision yet whether to withdraw our application or not withdraw and have it presumably be voted down. But wait a minute, this was supposed to be a fair process. And so there shouldn't have been a presumption at all that the vote was preordained. And the reporters were telling us that the Fed governor's vote was preordained. This was supposed to be an independent entity, and there's supposed to be process and procedure around it. We also have in writing from a reporter that all of the applicants at the OCC and the Fed, the OCC is the National Bank Chartering Authority, were simultaneously asked to withdraw their applications. Again, applications were supposed to be judged on their individual merits, but apparently that didn't happen here.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, we're Bitcoiners after all, Caitlin. So we're believers in incentives. What is the incentive for, denying this application?
Oh, anything new, anything innovative. It's interesting because, like I alluded, this was a long process, and towards the end, especially, we spent a lot of time with folks on the ground, and a lot. Again, there's only so much I can talk about. Technically, the way that the Fed works is that they control something called confidential supervisory information, and that cannot be disclosed without their permission. And of course, we're not exactly in a friendly position with them right now from the legal perspective because of that litigation. So there's only so much I can disclose. But once it all comes out, it's going to be clear, how much work we did with them from in the last several months, and how much progress we made. And I know we had our supporters among the staff. This was a political decision that came, unfortunately, we know, from the White House. Very surprising that the Federal Reserve would politicize a vote like this, but it did.
Interesting. And speaking about the White House, we know that the current administration has been, you can't even say they're doing it under the rug, right? They're definitely publishing it, in their, whether it's, the digital assets framework. The one that I find hilarious, Caitlin, was a report by the Treasury. And the report's name was The Future of Money and Payments, right? And that entire report, they mentioned stable coins, they mentioned payment platforms. Of course, they mentioned their favorite central bank digital currencies, but they never mentioned Bitcoin.
Mm.
And I thought that was fascinating.
Well, from my experience, and I've done a lot with mainstream. Again, I came from the mainstream world, right? So I have one foot in both worlds, and definitely am comfortable talking to people in both worlds, and have done a lot of talking with, you know, policymakers, including former Fed officials, about our world. And virtually none of them think Bitcoin should have value. They just dismiss it because nothing backs it. And of course, nothing backs the US dollar either, except something ephemeral, the full faith and credit of of the United States. Well, what does that actually mean? If you really stop and think about it, money's ephemeral, the whole thing. It's a confidence game. And but the whole concept of it being backed by the full faith and credit of the US government, people put a lot of stock in that, as opposed to being backed by math, which is and hash power and proof of work, which is just harder for people to get their heads around. But I would say the vast majority of people inside of the mainstream financial services regulatory apparatus don't understand Bitcoin because they can't get their heads around subjective value.